Hi, I'm Sharon, and I'm thrilled to be able to share my process for using temporary permissions with data mines today. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. Okay, so here I have provided my email and my GitHub link. I will show those to you again at the end. So a little bit about me. I started off teaching high school and then college, teaching writing. And that's very different than being a DBA. I'm like I am currently. But I went through a very difficult divorce and I needed a full-time job. I had been teaching college part-time. And so I went through an organization called LaunchCode. LaunchCode is in St. Louis, the city where I live, and it's a not-for-profit that works to help people transition into the tech fields. So I went through that. I learned SQL, and then I was hired at a company called NISA. NISA is an investment firm here in St. Louis, and I absolutely love working there. It's a very supportive and just a great place to work. After I was hired, I was asked to come back and be a teaching assistant. I had studied SQL. I had learned SQL under Kathy Kellenberger, shout out. And she asked me to come back and be a teaching assistant and then to be the lead mentor for the SQL cohort, which is very exciting for me. I'm currently on the St. Louis SQL Server and BI user advisory board and have spoken at the meetup group several times. And I am passionate about database security. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today. So my expectations are that a little bit of backstory on this. So I have found in trying to find out more information about database security that most information is very technical and in the weeds or is very introductory level. And so I have not found there to be a lot of information for those of us that are in the middle of our journey. And so that's why I've decided to try to share my journey and what I've learned with the broader community. So for this session, I would expect that somebody has basic understanding of how permissions work. So a login versus a user, roles and securables, although I will quickly define those as we go through. In the security world, we follow the principle of least privilege, and this is a passion of mine. So the idea is to give people access to what they need when they need it. So for example, if a developer is troubleshooting, there's an issue, they might need select on a view or a table that they would not normally have. We could give them that exact permission that they need, maybe for a few days while they're working on troubleshooting. So that is what I preach and have pushed, etc., at my company and anywhere I have any influence at all. So the idea, I really encourage people to give permissions on the securables rather than database wide. Database wide is easier. You give read one time and they have select to whatever they want, but they probably don't need everything for their jobs. So giving them specifically what they need for their jobs is the way to go. The principle of least privilege. So when I first started working at NISA, I was doing tickets and I would get requests for permissions, and most of the time at that time it was database wide, but not always. And most of the time the permissions, once granted, were there forever, even if they didn't actually need them. But every once in a while, I would get somebody would put in their ticket that they needed a permission for a week or maybe a month. And I would dutifully write it down on a Post-it note and I would put it on my monitor. So hence the Post-it notes for the presentation. Post-it notes on the monitor are obviously not the best method for doing things. Either the Post-it note falls down and gets lost, or you get so used to them being there that you just don't read them anymore, etc. So that is the downfall of the Post-it notes. So after a while, I developed version 2 of my process. Version 2 no longer needed Post-it notes. Instead, I created a table and I would enter the information into that table. And then I would, I had a process that would send the DBA team, i.e. a link, or I'm sorry, an email reminding me about a permission expiring. So this was much better than Post-its. They weren't falling down on the floor, etc. But it was still extra work. So there are several ways that this process, even though it was better than the Post-its, was extra work. One, I had to grant the permission and then enter the data into the table for the temporary process. That's double work, doing the same thing twice. Another piece of information, or a part of the process that took a little bit of time, was that I would get the email saying this is expiring in 3 days. And so then I would forward it to the developer and say that your permission is expiring. Do you want to extend it, or is it okay to expire? And then on the day, I would have to go in and delete the permissions. So that's just extra work. Now, my theory is if I am going to ask DBAs to go through and developers to go through the extra work of permissions, securables, and temporary, so that we're following the principle of least privilege, then I need to make it as easy as possible for people to do that and not have this be so much extra work for it to work out. So I have started working on the third version of my temporary permissions process, and that's the current one. And I have it mostly automated. There's still some features I'd like to add, etc. But for the most part, this is it works great, and this is what I'm going to share with you all today. Again, here's a GitHub link. I will share that again at the end. So for my demo today, I go through 6 different examples, both the database level permission as a role, database with securables, server level with a role, server level with securables, and 2 different types of error handling that I have added. So let me pull up SSMS and we will start working through the demo. Okay, so here I have database, and I've called it very creatively Post-it replacement. So that's the database that I have put in here, and in the GitHub I have links to, or I have the database creation script, I have the table creation scripts and all the stored procedures. All of that is in the GitHub link, and the PowerPoint presentation and the demo script. They're all in there for your ease. You can go through them at any time. Okay, so here we have Post-it replacement, and you'll see in here that have currently no users. It's stripped out. Nobody can access it except for me. So You can also see on the server that I have here, I already have some of these logins created because I am, for the demo, using SQL authenticated logins, but in the real world, you can use either SQL authenticated or Windows authenticated. In fact, most of the time at my work, it's Windows AD groups, which is what I'm expecting most of you to be using. I just wanted to let you know that it definitely does work for Windows groups, but the SQL authenticated are easier for me for the demo. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'll show you. I have two tables, the active temporary permissions table and an archive table. So let's go ahead and go through the active one. So I have it in here as if I had just typed it in. I have not applied it in any way yet, as you can tell, because nobody has permissions here. So let's go ahead and go through the columns that I have in the table. So I have the server name for my demo. I have one poorly named server, and that's all. But in a work setting, I think it is highly likely that most of you would have multiple servers. So you would want to have the server name in there, included in there. Database name, in this case, we're using post-it replacement. Username, PM from the office. Permission, this is either grant or deny. I don't recommend using deny unless you have a really good reason. This case, we're going to do a roles database wide. So we're doing data reader. So it's not a secureable. These are my switches. Not a secureable, not a secureable using that on the schema. Don't need to include the secureable objects because it is not a secureable. Here's where I include who requested it. So the person that put in the ticket and their email. That wasn't showing up. There we go. Their email. So that way it can automatically send them an email when they're coming up to that expiration time. The expiration date I have included as Friday. And it's a computed column letting us know how many hours before it expires. I have it set up for hours. So you could put in a permission maybe for 2 hours or something if it's highly elevated and not just for the days. Defaults to the date added. Comments, you can put any comment in here. However, I highly recommend putting whatever kind of change management system that you have. If you have ticket numbers, this is a good place for that. So it gives the added by defaults to who put the information in. So if there's a problem or a question, you could go back to your friendly DBA and you'll know which one, who put that in. And these are more switches. Is active, it defaults to true because I am assuming if you are putting the work in to add this, that you want it to be active. Is applied is false. It's not applied yet. We've seen that. It's a server perm. It is not, and this is a nullable column, so you don't need to put in false, but you can. And is SQL user is true because I am using a SQL authenticated user. If you're using a Windows, you can, this is nullable and it'll automatically assumes it's Windows unless you tell it otherwise. So this is what's in my table, my active permissions table. And if you look at the archive table, it is empty. It has most of the same columns, but it is empty. Okay, so now that I have added the PM from the office, giving her data reader to the temp table, then I am going to go down to my jobs and I am going to manually run this job. Now on my at my work, I have this job set to run every 5 minutes. So you could just add it in there and then just move on and it will get applied. You can set it to run every 15 minutes is a very lightweight job, and or however often works for you, or just run it manually, which for the demo works better. So here we're going to start our job. And then we're going to go back to our permissions for post-it replacement, refresh it, and now you'll see Pam from the office. And if I look in there and I go to look at the roles, and it's showing that she has data reader on the database, just like I would expect. Now that I have run that job, if I refresh my information or my table here, if I go over to the is active is still true and is applied is now true. So that's what happens when you apply the when you apply the job, run the apply job. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to manually run the notify that the permissions are expiring, and this one is expiring tomorrow, so I would expect to get an email for this. So I have it set to go for 5 days before it's expired, because people like me tend to be really bad about checking their email or not always looking at it very quickly. So this way I can make sure that the developers know that their permissions are expiring. Do they actually need them back? So let's go ahead and start this job. I have this one set to run once a day at 8 in the morning, so that to give the most likely time for people to look at their email. And so now I'm going to show you what my email looks like. So I just received this email, and I have it set up so that you have the developer would have the information that they would need to, because this could have been, you know, several days ago or even longer, so they may not remember exactly. So it has the username, the server name, the database name, the expiration date, who requested it, what the permission was, data reader in this case, the securables, if they have that. So that is all in the emails. And then the way I worded it, this is when it's going to be revoked. If you need it to be extended, please contact the DBAs. That way, if they don't contact us, then it just will get revoked. So that's the email. And then, okay, so the next thing we're going to do, instead, we're going to show you what I'm going to show you what would happen once that permission has expired. So I'm going to update my table to make it so that Pam's from the office's permission has already expired. And you can see that by here, it's showing, no, it's expired. And so what will happen now? So you could see, again, already expired. The archive is still empty. And now I'm going to run a job, and I'm just doing it through T-SQL because it's easier for demo purposes. So I'm going to run a job that will both delete the permissions and then archive that information. So let's run the job. And now we're going to go back up. Refresh. Pam from the office is still there. I am quite cautious, and I did not include a step to delete the user because there could be many reasons why that user might still need to be there. And I'm just quite cautious. So, but if we look at Pam from the office, you will see that the permission has been deleted. I have a separate process that lets me know of users that don't have any permissions, and so I can then look at it and see if it needs to be deleted. So that's my cautious nature there. Okay, so Pam from the office, it's been deleted, but now if we go back in and look at our archive, that row is now in our archive temp table, and it is not in the active temporary permissions table. So Pam from the office no longer has Reid, and that information has been archived. So that's the example of a role, a database permission with a role. So the next one we're going to do is the securable. So this time we're going to give Pam from the office, and we are going to give her insert on the person.person table inside AdventureWorks. Yay, Pam. So here we go. Oh, before I do that, I'm going to show you, let me go up and show you in AdventureWorks that Pam, currently no user, no permissions there. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do this. I'm just doing this through T-SQL. I think that's the best way for the demo, so that you guys don't have to watch me type. And then now you can see that temporary permissions, the active table is no longer empty and has the insert on the person.person table. It has not been applied yet. It is still, but it is active, but not applied. Okay, so now we're going to do another one, and we're going to do, this time we're going to grant Pam from the office select on the sales schema in AdventureWorks. So here we go. And now when we look in our active permissions table, you will see that there are 2 rows because we have added 2 different permissions for the same person. Okay. So before we run the Sprock, the job that runs the Sprock apply temporary permissions, I'm going to show you how I constructed that Sprock. And again, this is available in the GitHub link. I have it set for troubleshooting purposes so that you could do the debug. I've learned this at my company, and I absolutely love having the comment blocks that include an execute statement in there. That way, if there are any parameters, you have the sample parameters up there right there. It's very helpful. Okay, so when we go into the Sprock, the main thing, there's a couple things. The first thing it's going to do is this if exists, and it's looking for permissions that are active but not applied yet. So if there aren't any, then it's going to do nothing. So that's the first thing it's going to do. And I have this all wrapped inside a transaction so that if you are applying multiple permissions, they'll either all apply or none, so that if there's an error, you don't have to figure out what actually was applied and what wasn't. So, okay, so once you know we have a permission like we do, we know we have, let's refresh that. We have 2 of them to do. So this is a cursor that goes through each row. These are not long, so it's still lightweight, even if it's a cursor, and is looking for the is applied false. And then I have included comments to make it easy to follow along to see what I'm doing. So here, this is some error handling. If the login doesn't exist, it can create it if it's a Windows authenticated login. If it's a SQL authenticated login, that is outside the scope of this process, needs to be created manually because of the password or in a different, using a different process. However, you would want to do that depending on how often you have SQL authenticated logins. So once the login has been created, if need be, then it will create a user. If the user doesn't exist, then this can be either Windows authenticated or a SQL authenticated user. Either one, if the login's there, then it can create either one. Then the next section, I have applying server permissions if it's a role, and basically using the dynamic SQL to construct the query to apply the permissions. And this one is if it's a server secureable, then and how to do that. And that one, remember those switches that I talked about, is secureable, is schema, is false, and then but it is server permission is true. So basically using those as switches for each of these sections. Then this one is if database permissions, if it's a role, a database role, how do I construct that? Here is database permissions on a secureable, but it's not a schema. This one is database permissions if it's a secureable, but it is on a schema, like we did the select on the sales schema. So this one is that way. And the reason I have them separated out is just because the construction of the query for that is a little bit different, which is why I have those switches in the table. And then after it has applied the permissions, it's going to update the row to the is applied is true. And then it goes to the next row. So that is our Sprock that applies the permissions. And then I have just created a job that runs that Sprock. Okay, so let's go ahead and run that Sprock. And then these were in AdventureWorks. So I'm going to go over here to show you. I'm refreshing. Pam from the office is now showing up in AdventureWorks. I look in here and I have the schema, sales schema, and it shows the select. And this one table on the person.person table, and it has insert, just like we would have expect. And has we expired and deleted the data reader, so that is not there. Okay, so those are the examples if the database is permission is a role or if it is a secureable. So now let's look at some server level permissions. If it's a role, and in this case, I am going to grant the permissions on Allison Swims with Gators. So right now, if we open that up, you could see there server roles, just public, no securables. So on here, it's just connect on the server. Okay, so now I'm going to insert in here into my active temp permissions. This one is Allison Swims with Gators. And this one I'm granting sysadmin. Oh, terrible, I know, but every so often, it may be a very good reason to do it. You'll notice on here that I put in a specific time because the sysadmin should be for as short of a time as would be needed. Okay, so now that we've done that, you could see Allison Swims with Gators right here. And this one on the end, we have the is server permission is true. Okay, now, so that is a role. Sysadmin is a role. But often, if it's a server level, we are rarely granting something like sysadmin. It might be instead something like a server level secureable, something like alter trace. So that's the example I have in here. So now I'm going to insert that into the table. Select from it and show you. Now we have the all four, the two Pam from the office, Allison swims with gators. This one no longer has the role, but is secureable, is true, and it is alter trace. This one doesn't, it's not so much a secureable object, but it does have the secureable in there. And at the end, we definitely have to tell it that it's a server level permission. Okay, now let's apply those permissions. And I'm going to show you Allison swims with gators, now server level role, sysadmin. Making me nervous just thinking about it. And the secureable, she has alter trace. Okay, now I'm going to take this sysadmin stuff. It's just, it doesn't need to be any longer than it was. I am going to update it to have expired. Doing that. So now if you look at the table, the sysadmin has expired, but the others have not. And so now I'm going to run my job to delete and archive those temporary permissions. It's been run. Now I should expect only 3 rows instead of 4. 3 rows. The sysadmin is gone, but it is in my archive table. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the other sprocs, and I'll show you how I constructed those. So the notify permissions to delete. Again, I have my comment block. And then here I've created my table that has all the information that I want to provide in the email, if the email is set to go out. And again, I have this in a debug so that I can work on it. I have it set for 5 days, but you could easily change that to 2 or 7 or whatever works best for you. So then here I have it set in a try catch. So with the information, with the profile information, set up the 5 days again, and then it will put it into this my dynamic SQL with the section in HTML so that the email is nice and easy to read and has all of the information that is needed. And then this is just setting it up. If it's in the debug mode, it'll print it rather than actually running it. So here I have it. I use this when I'm troubleshooting. I want to make sure that the email is just going to myself and not out to people in the company. You could also, but normally I have it set to the current requester, you know, the person who is put in the ticket. You could just make sure that the only entry in your table is one that you put in if you're troubleshooting. But I do like to, and I just leave it commented out there. So that is the Sprock that I use to send the email. So you could see that on the GitHub if you want to see how I did that in greater detail. The next one is delete. It's not deleting the user or deleting the information on the table. It is deleting the permissions. So this one is set up very closely to the apply permissions one, set up almost the same way. Only my is active is true, is applied is true, and it has expired. So then again, I have a cursor, have each section commented out like subtitles, tell my research paper background there. Check for missing user and mark as active as false if found. This is some error handling that I will show will show you in a little bit, but I wanted to show that where that is in the Sprock. And then we go into, if it's a server role, delete that, delete the permission if it's a secureable on the server. If it's a database role, and again, a database secureable, but not the schema, database secureable if it is a schema. And then after all that, it's going to update as active to false. And so that is how the delete store procedure works. And then we have one more to look at, and that is the archive one. So again, comment block. And I have, it just is taking the information from the active temporary permissions table, duplicating it into the archive table, and then deleting it from the archive or from the active table. It does have the error handling. It's telling you how many rows it archived. It will show that back up. So that is available in the GitHub for you also. Okay. So now let's look at more detail at the two examples that I have for error handling. So this one is if you're adding a SQL authenticated permission, but you have not created the login. Remember, again, that's outside the scope of this process. It involves passwords, etc. So let's go ahead and insert that into our table and apply it. And it's not going to apply. Instead, we have the error message, SQL login needs to be created manually. This way, if you have a new DBA on the team, they know exactly what is wrong, and it's easy for them to fix. So I'm going to go ahead and clean up. This was granting Thunder Falcon insert on the person.person table. That's not going to work out so much. I have to create Thunder Falcon login first. So instead of doing that for now, I'm going to delete that from my table so that it doesn't keep erroring out. Okay, so then the last example here, this is when the user is added to the temporary permissions table. It has become active, is applied, but something's happened. And so that user is no longer in the table, but maybe they left the company and we deleted them everywhere, but they're still in that table. So this is how I have worked to fix that. So we're going to run this insert. This time we're doing Katie Archives Medieval History, and we are granting her data writer. Oh, because I guess because she's archiving. So here we go. I'm going to run that. I am going to run the job. So this is in post-it replacement. So if we go up here, we go to refresh, Katie Archives Medieval History. She doesn't have a secureable, instead she has data writer, just like we were expecting. But for some reason, probably because she didn't leave the company, she got a promotion and is now in a different department. So she lost her permissions there, and we dropped that user. And so now I'm going to update to make it expired. And when I run my job, it works just fine, even though she wasn't there. because it went ahead and updated it to like I showed you in the store procedure to not being active. And those are the 6 examples I was going to show you. And please let me know if you have questions. I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint again. I have several ways you can contact me. I have my email. That's my personal email. Feel free to email me. The GitHub link, and then Twitter, Mastodon, Blue Sky, you know, all the social medias, or almost all. And then LinkedIn. I do actually look at LinkedIn quite often because I have students, you know, learning SQL, and I like to follow their careers. So feel free to contact me there also. So that is all I have for you, and I enjoyed sharing it with you and would love to hear from you. Thank you.